sunny afternoon, this news car receives a flash of an accident. A piece of news has just happened. The car has a two-way radio and is fast on the way to the scene. Through the crowded streets, it misses the scene of the accident. A reporter and photographer make up a team that is assigned to report the news as it happens. They get the facts. They get the pictures. Part of a much larger team. The story is then brought back to the home base, a building in the heart of the city where men are ready to put the story into words, and finally put those words into newsprint so that millions of readers may a hungry who always wants to know what is happening as soon as it happens, who was there and what took place. Our daily newspapers are so much a part of our everyday life that we seldom realize just how important they really are. Actually, they're designed for every member of the family. Dad digs into sport and finance pages. Mom is more interested in the social page. While the younger generation gets all wrapped up in the comics. We've grown to depend a lot on the local newspaper, and if we had more time, that could be a story in itself. But there's an interesting story, too, behind all the shouting of morning, evening, and extra editions. A story that goes back a good many years. I will tell you what I know about this story in the many years that I've operated the presses and played my part on the team. You see, I'm a pressman, and my job is to operate the machinery that puts the news in what we call a newspaper. It is pretty big. Although not as big as some machinery, it's a vital part of our everyday life. But here I am running off at the mouth and getting ahead of myself. So let's start at the beginning and see what it's all about. One of the first things a new man on the job wants to know how to do is make a paper hat. Sounds kind of funny at first, but it really helps to keep you clean. While the presses are running, you see, ink usually splatters a little, and this paper hat is an inexpensive way to keep your hair clean. And aside from all that, it's a mark of a real pressman, too. You'll see lots of the fellows in this picture wearing them. So you know it's a pretty practical idea. But to get to the machinery itself, this model will give you some idea of size. It represents 24 printing presses, or units, together with all the structure that goes to make up the press room. Counting the press room and the reel room, this equipment is about 3 stories high. And from this model, you get an idea of the number of men that it takes to run it. This section along the bottom is called the reel room. This is where the newsprint is handled and supplied to the presses. The newsprint comes in large rolls which weigh approximately 1,500 pounds each. Although they all have the same diameter, they come in 4 different widths. What we call a quarter roll, half roll, a three-quarter roll, and a full roll. Later on, you'll find out when and why these different sizes of paper are used. One of the first things you'll need to do is to set the reel for the right width of roll. First of all, this man takes off one of the 4 tension belts at the back of the reel. We're going to change from a full roll to a three-quarter roll, so we'll need one less. An important thing to remember from the beginning is that this side of the reel, where the controls are located, is called the main side, while the other side is called the off side. Those 3 arm brackets on either side are called spiders, and they rotate on an axle called a head bar. The whole thing is called a reel. The set screws on the spider are first loosened with a large socket wrench. It is then pushed toward the off side and lined up with a mark on the head bar, which has already been predetermined for a three-quarter roll. Then the set screws are tightened securely to keep the spider in place. This is the tape used to stick one roll of paper to another. These collars are called chucks, and this mallet affair with a rubber head is called a core tapper. It is used to drive home the chuck when it is placed in the center of a roll of paper or in the core. This is the sequence you'll use to mount a roll of paper into the reel. First step is to place the chuck in the core and seat it firmly with a core tapper. Then you'll take this marking guide, place it in the chuck, and make a crayon mark up the end of the roll. This is called a timing mark and is very important later on. Before we mount the roll, let's look at the label. This arrow is important because it tells the direction in which the paper will unwind. It also tells where the paper was made, how wide it is, and how much it weighs. The roll is transported on a small truck or dolly and pushed into position between the spiders. When it is positioned in this direction, it is then pushed into the spiders and lined up with the studs at each end. Rotating the spiders is done by means of this push-button control box. Pushing the yellow button turns the spiders clockwise. Pushing the one below it turns them counterclockwise. On the offside, an Allen wrench is used to turn the stud and line it up with the notched-out section of the chuck. This notch synchronizes the roll with the automatic timing cycle of the paster. The ratchet on the main side is pushed away from the operator to lock up the roll. After all this, the reel is rotated, the dolly pushed away, and will now start to web up or thread the paper into the unit upstairs. First step is to take off the wrapper. A small tool called a slitter is used to make the cut. At some point along here, it's a good idea to take the label off and stick it in the ratchet handle for tally later on. The wrapper is then folded up and laid aside. Next step is to rotate the roll and look for any bad tears or breaks, either along the edges or in the center of the roll of paper. As a measure of precaution against printing on damaged paper, a few outside layers are always stripped off the roll first. The slitter is used again for this purpose, and the excess paper rolled up as the roll is slowly turned. After the scrap has been removed, one of the operators puts on a gum sticker to hold the loose edge of paper. Then they tear a lead, which means that the paper is torn diagonally across the roll as the roll is rotated. When this is completed, the reel is rotated until the roll of paper is in the operating position or in the back of the reel. At this point, one of the men climbs up on the reel. The other man hands under the idler roller, passed over a third roller, and handed upstairs to the top color man for webbing through the presses. The next step is to turn on the power to the tension belts by means of this small control box. The upper end of the belts are kept tight by these pulleys. The purpose of the belts is to act as a brake and keep a little pressure on the roll, which is turning at high speed. Should the press slow down for some reason, the roll would otherwise continue to spin at high speed and run away with itself. Another purpose of the belts is to drain off some of the static electricity created by the rotating roll of paper. Let's take a look now at some of the operations you'll be doing more frequently. Mounting a roll and make ready for a paster are two of the most common jobs to be found in the reel room. Perhaps we can get a clearer picture of why these steps are needed when we see what they lead to, namely making a paster. This is the term used to describe the splicing of a new roll of paper to one that is almost expired. Most of the equipment we use today has some sort of automatic devices for making a paster while the paper is still running at a fairly high speed. This method has been devised to allow the paster to be made without stopping the production of the newspaper. If you've been watching closely, you have noticed that the roll on top was brought back to touch the web, as the paper is called when it comes off the roll. Then, at a certain point, a strip of gum tape on the new roll is wetted, making it stick to the expiring web. As soon as the splice is complete, the old web is chopped off. You can see the old core in the lower left-hand corner of the picture. Now let's start from here and see how we'll prepare for the next paster. As soon as a paster has been made, the normal procedure is to mount a new roll into the reel. First, you'll take off the old core and lay it aside to dispose of later. Then, two men will work as a team to mount a new roll into the reel. Notice that they go through the same motions as we saw a short time ago. The only difference here is that the reel is operating with two other rolls in place. Once again, they line up the roll with the studs in the spider, turn the offside stud to fit into the chuck, and lock up the roll with the ratchet. Stripping the wrap off is also the same as before, but this time we see something new. The paper is now folded so that a crease is formed about 2 inches above the chuck mark on the offside of the roll. One person tears off the excess paper along this crease, while the other man goes to get some gum tape. The nose of the paster, or the point of a V that will be formed on the roll, is measured off from the main side. A small piece of tape is placed here to hold the paper to the roll. Then, with a long section of tape, the two men apply it in the shape of a V. The extra tape is applied along the edge and parallel to the initial piece. The next step is to tear off the excess paper along the V. After this has been done, the roll is rotated once more to be sure that there are no breaks or tears in the paper that would cause it to rip as it runs through the presses. Losing a lead can cause a lot of work. Then, 1 or 2 flags are put on the roll to indicate later which newspapers contain the splice section. Back to the paster. The operator presses the yellow button on the control box. This is the decrease button which slows the press down to paster speed as indicated by this white light. When the paster speed is reached, the operator presses the top or safe button. This green light indicates that the safe is on. Now the switch on the paster cycle control box is flicked on, which readies the automatic paster cycles. One of the things that it does is to raise these choppers into operating position. As soon as the paster has been made, the arms swing out and break the expiring web, allowing one sheet of paper to go to the presses. The operator now watches this idler roller very intently. As soon as the press has reached the paster speed, about 28,000 papers per hour, this roller drops a few inches. At this point, the operator presses the paster button, and the cycle is now completely automatic. Here's what happens. When the paster is about to be made, these nozzles spray a liquid called trichloroethylene. This liquid makes the gum tape sticky, and the new roll of paper sticks to the old web. As soon as this happens, the choppers go into action and cut the old web, and the paster is complete. The new roll then comes back to normal operating position. One of the routine jobs is to occasionally dampen the ends of the roll. This prevents the paper from tearing too readily. After the paster, the center idler should be adjusted to eliminate, as much as possible, the wrinkles in the paper. This knob raises or lowers one end of the roller and helps to take the wrinkles out. A smooth web makes a much better printing job. Let's go back to the model now and see where the presses are located. Here is one of the presses in operation. By raising the guard, we can get a better look inside and see how it operates. That large cylinder there holds the plates that actually do the printing. Each plate is half round, and there are 4 rows across the cylinder. That makes a total of 8 plates on one plate cylinder. There is another plate cylinder on the other side of this unit. Altogether, one unit has 16 plates and will print a total of 16 pages. Behind the web, there is an impression cylinder which keeps the web tightly pressed against the plate cylinder. These rollers are called ink distribution rollers, and their main purpose is to spread the ink out evenly. The ink comes in at the bottom, is transferred from one ink drum to another, until finally it is transferred directly to the printing plates. Part of the ink distribution system is this ink reservoir and color control box. The ink flows into this box from a central storage tank. From here, it is piped by small tubes to various sections of the ink rollers. Each of these keys controls the flow of ink to a particular column and thereby regulates how light or dark the printing will be. These plungers along the bottom control the flow to each roll of the plates. Pushing the plungers in stops the ink from flowing to that particular section. For black ink, the supply to these boxes is entirely automatic. But to start from the beginning, let's see how you would go about plating up a unit. These men work as a team to identify the plates as they come from the stereotype room. One person checks off the page numbers, while the other person puts a dot of paint on each one. All the plates with the same color dot will go to the same unit. Down at the unit, our pressman looks for the plates that have a blue dot. He picks these off the conveyor and arranges them in the order that they will go on the plate cylinders. The 4 plates that go on the main side of one plate cylinder are arranged on that side. The plates for the off side of the unit would be lined up over there. This arrangement gives the pressman a chance to double-check his plates before they go on the unit, and it's the simplest way to keep track of the plates to see if any are missing. For the actual plating up sequence, let's watch this pressman do it for us. First thing, of course, is to open the cover of the unit. Then he rotates the plate cylinder until it's in position to remove one set of plates. A short bar is used to unlock the plates by inserting it in a slot of the plate cylinder and moving it upward. Each plate is then taken off separately and stacked up on a small truck. This lead that is taken off the unit is now referred to as killed, or you could call it dead lead. The pressman picks up a new plate, checks the page number or folio number, and puts it on the plate cylinder. Notice that he puts on the inside plate first, and then puts on the outside plate. Next step is to rotate the plate cylinder halfway around to get at the other 2 plates on the main side. He then goes through the same procedure as before to remove the old plates and replate with the new set. Now that you have the general idea, let's go back and watch each step more closely. The button just above the bottom one is called an inch button. This is used to accurately control the movement of the press. After positioning, the operator pushes the safe button, which locks the unit. This is a safety precaution that must never be overlooked. Notice that the pressman picks up the bottom of the plate first, then moves his hands into a better position when he has raised the plate high enough. This pressman checks the locking clamps to be sure that they are completely toward the main side before he loads his first new plate. After the plate is in position, he uses the lockup bar again to be sure that the plate is entirely seated along the right side. Don't forget that these plates rotate at very high speeds, and any plate that is not clamped securely is extremely dangerous, not only to persons around the press, but to the people in the real room as well. Once again, the inch button is used to position the cylinder and the safe button pressed as a safety precaution. The plates are then unlocked and removed in the same manner as we saw before. Plating up the off side of the unit is done in exactly the same way. Notice here that the plates on the main side and the off side are staggered. This arrangement eliminates a gap across the full width of the cylinder, which would cause slippage at these points. It would also result in impacting every time the plates made a new contact. After all work has been done on the unit, the safety is knocked out simply by pushing the run button. Some units, the ones nearest the folder, are equipped with an extra plate cylinder which is used principally for color runs. Aside from that, they're just the same as other units. With the upper and lower guards out of the way, we can get a little better idea of the two plate cylinders. Since color is spotted throughout the newspaper, these fudge decks often run with just a few plates rather than the full complement of 8. Plating up the fudge deck is a two-man job, although the actual procedure is just the same as we have seen before. Notice that one man must hold the plates from falling out as the other man unlocks them. These plates weigh in the neighborhood of 35 pounds, so you can see that it's a good safety precaution to have another man helping you. Putting in the new plates is done in the same manner. This time, though, the inside plate can be locked up as soon as it is properly seated. Notice, too, that we are only using a spot color on this unit, and 2 plates are all that are used. Back again to the model, and this time we're going to look at the folder. Usually there is one folder for every 4 units, and it's located on the same floor as the units. This part of the folder is called the former. Actually, this is where the printed web gets its first fold. The web is coming in at the top of the former and is 2 pages wide. And as it progresses downward, the 2 edges of the web are brought closer to each other until the web is folded flat. This part of the folder is where the sections are collected and cut off. Hence, it's called the collect or cutting cylinder. Every time the cylinder makes one revolution, a complete newspaper is wrapped around it. Cutting knives then cut that paper from the incoming web, and the newspaper is pushed down into the actual folder. The newspaper has then been folded the second time and is in its final form. This is how the front of the folder looks as it operates at normal speed. Notice that every 50th paper is kicked out. The speed of the units and folder is indicated by this tachometer, which is calibrated in thousands of papers printed per hour. Just below it is a counter which keeps a record of the number of papers printed for each run. Webbing up the folder isn't a tough job at all once you get the knack of it. Here we see the web being torn into a V shape. The nose of the V is then guided down between 2 rollers called nipping rollers. Sometimes you have to get them spinning a little bit to help draw in the paper. As the folded web comes through the nipping rollers, it is brought around the compensating rollers and fed down into the next set of nipping rollers just above the collecting cylinder. A small lead is then started and the webbing up completed as the lead is combined with the existing sections of the paper. When the presses are operating at regular speed, a few adjustments are often necessary. Here we see the trolleys at the top of the former being adjusted for a new thickness of paper. The trolleys actually pull the web into the former and must necessarily apply a little pressure. Just enough to cause a mark on the surface is generally considered enough pressure. Down at the folder again, we see that the nipping trolleys can be too tight and exert enough pressure to crack the web. This condition is remedied by backing off on the adjusting knob just enough to stop the web from breaking, and maybe an extra turn too. Here's a condition you may come across when starting a new section. This bottom margin is pretty far out of line. These knobs, located at the units, control the compensating rollers for that unit. A few turns of the knob to the right will correct the bottom margin. This page shows that the bottom margin is okay. Every page is checked for color, or how light or dark each column prints on a page. Adjusting for color is done at the control keys on the ink box. Since each key controls a single column, a few turns to the left will darken those columns that appear to be light in color. Another look at the page shows us that the color is now uniform. At the beginning of a new roll of paper, you may find the edge margin to be off in one direction. This small control box on the unit can adjust the reel either left or right. Pressing the upper button several times moves the reel to the right and thereby adjusts the margin. Another look at the web shows us that the margin is just about right. Well, that's about it. A newspaper is the product of news events, writers, machines, and men. Other people may take the glory, but it's the pressman's satisfaction and pride that headline meets deadline.